Welcome to the Glen Merzer Show. You can find us across all your favorite podcast platforms. Find us on YouTube. Please remember to subscribe. Find us at realmeneatplants.com. Our show is sponsored by First Seed Foods. That is healthy, oil-free Indian food without the butter, oil, or ghee. This food is delicious. It comes to you freeze dried and arrives at your door in these little containers. All kinds of different dishes. So that's firstseedfoods.com. Put in my code GLEN10, GLEN 10 for $10 off your first order. We have a returning guest today. Cyd Notter is a health coach, a licensed Food for Life instructor for the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, and she holds a plant-based nutrition certificate from the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies. You can find her at cydnotter.com. That's CYDNOTTER.com. Cyd, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Glenn. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, we should tell the audience that we are both under tornado watches as we speak. And so if we get hit by a tornado, this could go viral.
Or spiral.
Yes. And if people are, blown away by our discussion, well, we may get blown away too. You're going to be giving us a little presentation today, is that right?
That's right. I'm going to talk about the 6 big disconnects between nutrition and health. There's probably more, but these are 6 big ones that I've noticed.
Okay. And how long ago did you notice these 6 big disconnects?
Well, let's see. It was included in my book, which released 5 years ago. So before that, so more than 5 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you want to just get right into the presentation?
Sure. Would you like that as well?
In case a tornado comes, let's just jump right in.
Right. But if I hear a train, as I mentioned, I'm heading for the basement.
Yes.
All right. Let me share my screen and let me make sure you can see it here. How's that?
That looks good.
Good. All right. Let me see if it switches. Yeah, it does. So there we go. And there, oops, hang on a second. So let's get back to here. My little disclaimer here that the materials I'm presenting are for dietary information only and should not be construed as personal medical advice. We always like to start with that. And then I want to talk about things we do for prevention. Have you ever thought about how many things we do in the interest of prevention? I've got a few of them listed here. We wear seat belts to prevent injury. We install security alarms to prevent burglaries. We have our cars tuned up to prevent breakdowns. We wear sunscreen to prevent sunburn, and we purchase certain toothpaste to prevent tooth decay. We back up our computers to prevent losing data. And we even put certain oils on our pets to prevent fleas. But where we are sadly lacking in this wide area of prevention is what we choose to eat every day. We might be willing to spend a lot of money on supplements because we're led to believe that those prevent disease, but we often give very little thought to the role that nutrition plays in the prevention, halting, and reversal of disease. So here's what I call a few of the big disconnects between nutrition and health. The first one is not understanding the cause and effect of food. So we can all relate to the immediate pain that results when we touch a hot stove or we step on a sliver, right? But it's quite easy in those circumstances to identify the current cause of our pain, right? It's the red hot burner or the damaged wood floor that we just stepped on. And wouldn't our job be a lot easier, Glenn, if the same identifier were true of the 5 pounds of food that we eat every day? So when it comes to a poor diet, the more time that elapses between food intake and the resulting negative effect, the more difficult it is to make that connection between the two, right? A lot of times diseases don't appear until later in life and people aren't connecting that with what they've been eating. So the more time that goes by, too, the more unlikely we are to change our behavior or to take any action to change things. Now, on the other hand, there are certain health conditions for which the cause of pain is really easily identifiable, like acid reflux or food allergies or migraines or a hangover, right? We can very well attribute those things to something we've recently consumed or drank. For the most part, though, so little awareness exists between the consumption of bad food and the resulting injury that people are not connecting those two dots. So the big disconnect between the wrong food choices and the resulting ailments would really be greatly eliminated if we had chest pain right after ate a cheeseburger and fries, right? But we don't. Or if our joints got achy after we ate some glazed donuts, or if we felt our blood pressure spike after we ate some fried chicken, then we might be able to connect those dots. But for the most part, though, people are not connecting those dots. And I remember before my husband and I embarked on a plant based journey, my husband would order this fried fish dinner and a milkshake at a very popular fast food restaurant. This was like 35 years ago. And then shortly after, he developed this mucousy cough, which would last about an hour. Well, we didn't think anything about that at the time, but it was only when we learned about the cause and effect of the irritants of dairy that we were connecting those dots with what was going on with him. So that's big disconnect number one. Do you have any comments about that disconnect, Glenn? Have you seen that as well?
It's self-evident really that when people, eat something that gives them an acid reflux, they say, "Oh, what did I just eat?" But
Mhm.
when people get cancer, it's
Yeah.
hard to know that it could have been related to the dairy they've been eating over the last 30 years. You know,
Right. Yeah.
it's it's certainly a true statement.
All right. Well, let's move on to big disconnect number two is I'm on meds, so I no longer have a problem. So taking medication for a chronic condition and then believing the problem no longer exists ranks as a big disconnect I've witnessed over the years. Some of my clients even consider themselves to be in excellent health despite the need for several daily prescription medications. And they're not alone because many people are taking meds for preventable conditions. And I think most of these people are falling prey to a false sense of security because their biomarkers are landing within a healthy range, right, on the blood test, and they begin to feel better. So when that happens, the typical American is making no meaningful lifestyle change because they reason that their health issues have been solved, right, by the medications, and their doctors may not be telling them any different. So, despite the symptom relief and the better blood work, that chronic condition, along with its root cause, will continue to exist until the dietary environment that's needed to heal or reverse that condition is provided. So, why stay on a lifetime regimen of medications along with all of their side effects, which often lead to more medication, when just changing the dietary pattern to what we are designed to eat has been proven time and again to be the answer? So I always like to say, why manage disease when you can most likely get rid of it? Oh, any comments on that, Glenn? Have you seen
Well,
that
I
same?
I am so lucky, Sid, because I cannot swallow a pill. I just
Mm.
don't understand how people do that. I remember as a kid, I tried to take a vitamin and swallow it, and it just didn't go down. So I've never taken any medicine in my life.
Wow.
And so it's just such a lucky way to go through life, being unable to swallow a pill.
Wow.
Maybe one day there'll be a pill that would save my life if I could swallow it, but I just won't be able to.
Mm. It's interesting.
I don't know how people do that, swallow pills. I find it
Yeah,
amazing.
really. Okay, especially like the big ones, right? Those big honking ones.
I
They're
I have no idea how people do it.
maybe they mash them up in
Well,
things
I could
with the
do that. I
applesauce.
could
Yeah.
I could mash things up in applesauce, but I can't swallow a pill.
Hmm. All right. Well, let's move on then to big disconnect number three, which is it runs in my family, so it's out of my control. That's another disconnect between nutrition and health. because this deals with the misconception that diet and lifestyle don't matter because disease X runs in my family, whatever the disease is. And I've heard this expression countless times over the years from people who believe the genetic cards have been dealt and they are powerless to prevent disease. We had an air conditioner man at our house here last year, and he's expecting his heart attack. He's all the men in his family have a heart attack at age 55, and he goes, "So at 55, I'm going to have my heart attack." He's actually expecting it because that's
He's
what runs in
planning
his
for it.
family. Yes, he's planning for it.
Yeah. By the way, my family was like that too. All the men in my family had heart attacks in their 50s.
No kidding.
Yeah, both sides
Mm,
of my family. That's why I became
wow.
a vegetarian at 17. I didn't want to be middle-aged at 25.
Wow. So you were really smart as a teenager then, even, right?
You know, it was the smartest thing I ever did, except that at 17 I became a vegetarian and not a vegan. So
Mm,
I got convinced by some obese relatives that I needed to have my protein, so I should have cheese, and
hmm.
that could have killed me.
So,
But eventually I got rid of the cheese.
okay. So was your main motivation back then disease prevention or was it animal?
Yes, when I was
Oh,
17, look, I had never known my grandparents. My mother's, when I was 16, my mother's two brothers got heart attacks and died. My mother had a heart condition. My father's side of the family, the cousins had died of heart attacks. So I just saw all this death around me. I thought, why in the world would I be stupid enough to eat the way these people are eating?
mm,
It's obviously something they're doing wrong.
mhm.
So it seemed obvious to me. And all these years later, and we're talking 50 years later, all these years later, people are still arguing about, the carnivore diet versus the paleo diet versus the vegan diet. And it just seemed to me obvious back then. I mean, you look at a hamburger, it looks like a heart attack.
Mm,
Broccoli doesn't look like a heart attack.
mm.
So, uh, I've learned the science since then that confirmed my instincts. But man, it seemed obvious back then. It amazes me that we still have to argue about it.
Was there anybody back then purporting for a vegan lifestyle? Doctors or books that you were
Well,
reading, or
I
you?
had heard Dick Gregory speak, and Dick Gregory advocated the vegetarian diet.
Oh,
I had seen Dick Gregory, in fact, when he was fasting to protest the war in Vietnam.
mhm.
And he didn't eat solid food for something like a year and a half to protest the war in Vietnam. He was on just water and fruit juices. And then
Oh,
finally, America got out of Vietnam, and Dick Gregory held a press conference to announce the end of his fast. And he was asked, Mr. Gregory, would you fast again if America got involved in another Vietnam? And he said, I wouldn't fast again if they were fighting in my living room. So I thought, this is a guy to listen to.
well, he obviously stayed committed to the cause, even though maybe it
Yeah.
wasn't very pleasant for him. All right. So, yeah, big disconnect number three is thinking that your genetic cards have been dealt. And if you're living with the assumption that you have no control over your health because you're pre programmed for some malady, then I have good news for you because disease and disability are more preventable than you think, even if even if you're genetically predisposed, rather.
Yeah. Of course, what really runs in people's families isn't so much the genes as the spaghetti and meatballs, or the
Hmm.
turkey Thanksgiving dinner, or
Right.
the grilled burgers on July 4th, or whatever. What really runs in people's families is the traditions of eating.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's a big difference between being born with a gene, which is genetic predisposition, and whether that gene will develop into a disease, which is genetic expression.
Right. And I was
So,
certainly born with the genes that could lead to heart disease if I ate the way Americans eat.
right. So, T. Colin Campbell has some great examples of this in his writings. Like, suppose you were born with a predisposition for colorectal cancer, for example. Your food choices remain by far the greatest determinant as to whether or not you'll develop cancer. Non-genetic factors like your diet and your lifestyle account for up to 90% of our top killers, according to resources listed on Dr. Greger's website. And again, another thing Dr. Campbell pointed out was that, well, he, as you know, many of you, if you don't know who Dr. T. Colin Campbell is, he's the author of the China Study, and he's nutritional biochemist who has spent decades in the area of nutrition research. And one of the articles that he authored revealed how the gene responsible for liver cancer can be dramatically repressed by consuming less animal protein and thereby delaying the onset of liver cancer or preventing liver cancer. And then we also have research from the Alzheimer people that the Alzheimer gene, that APOE4 gene, diet trumps genes in the expression of that dreaded disease, Alzheimer's disease, with saturated fat intake and midlife cholesterol levels being a factor in the development of dementia. So there's all this research. I like Dr. McDougall. He even pointed out that our healthy genes can be turned on by a good gut environment, just like the poor genes will live in an unhealthy gut bacteria environment. I'm going to mess that up. So remember, the genetics may load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. If you've never heard that expression before, genes can only establish the potential for disease. They do not represent a guaranteed diagnosis. And that healthy environment that Dr. McDougall always referred to would be a starch-based diet with vegetables, fruits, and whole grains, and the avoidance of animal products and oils. So, like Glenn was saying, certain diseases do tend to run in families, but it's clear that people are giving their genetic makeup way too much credit for their ailments, right? And maybe some people are even using it as a handy excuse to avoid making any lifestyle changes. But the biggest risk, as Glenn pointed out, is the pattern, the eating pattern, the lifestyle patterns that are being passed down from the parents. So think about that with your own family. What are the children learning in your families? Think about that. Because switching to a whole food plant-based diet is the best defense to prevent, halt, and reverse disease, regardless of your genetic makeup. And I have a dire family history of stroke, cancer, heart disease, diabetes. So I'm very relieved to know that my genetics are not going to determine my outcome. All right, well, let's move on to big disconnect number 4, which is making small changes and expecting big results. So some people settle for small changes when they're switching to a healthier diet, but other people who are convinced by the evidence, they choose to make a total dietary change overnight. And still others may fall in the middle somewhere. They make a series of small changes with a firm goal toward total conversion. But for people who wade into the waters more slowly, and I know a lot of people who prefer to do that because it's kind of scary to change your diet. Every small change toward a whole food plant-based diet without added oils is indeed a step in the right direction. So I never want to discourage even small positive changes, but it must be noted that our overall dietary pattern is what matters greatly. So merely removing or adding 1 or 2 different foods to the standard American diet is not very likely to result in big health improvement. For example, if you're adding flaxseed to a dairy-based smoothie, for example, or you're putting some broccoli in a steak stir fry, or maybe you're topping that high-fat cheesecake with a few blueberries, those are just like small changes that aren't probably going to result in much change to your health. And then when people don't see the immediate weight loss or the health improvements, they often assume that the diet isn't working and they end up throwing in the towel, right? Because their thinking goes something like, well, I'm making all these changes, but I haven't lost a pound and my cholesterol is still high. I might as well eat whatever I want. And then enter big disconnect number 4, right? Making small changes and expecting big results.
Let me ask you about this one, Cyd. When you work as a health coach, do you find that you often work with people who feel, well, let me just try Meatless Monday, or let me just try adding more vegetables to my meat-based meals? People who are unwilling to make the serious changes that will really make a difference.
Yes, unfortunately, Glenn, that is pretty common. I have them watch a webinar before I agree to work with them so they know what they can expect that I'm going to ask them to eat.
Uh-huh.
Because why waste my time and theirs, right? If they're not really serious about it. That's how I feel. If you're not really
Mm.
serious about making a commitment to this, then my coaching is not really going to be that valuable to you. So, but if you're ready, I always tell them, if you're really ready to jump in, make a commitment, then I'll be your biggest cheerleader and I'll help you however I can do that, we'll get over those hurdles together, because there probably will be hurdles. At the start,
Mhm.
there typically are hurdles.
Yeah.
But if you're going to like cave at the first hurdle, then we got to figure out why. What's stopping you from making the changes? That's another thing. I have 12 barriers to change that I write about in my book.
Oh,
The
there's
12
another
biggest,
one. 12 barriers to change.
yes, yeah, that
Okay.
I've noticed over the years that like even people that want to make change, they get stymied for some reason. And I've discovered there's like 12 reasons for that.
Okay.
Probably more, but yeah. So in answer to your question, yes, there are people that want to wade in more slowly and do things slowly, and that's fine. But by this date over here in 4 or 5 weeks, we're going to be totally converted, not just stay stuck at the beginning for weeks and weeks. There's got to be forward movement, even with the small changes. Does that make
So
sense?
have you worked with people who were really very, very reluctant at first and made only small changes and then they got all the way there?
That's the goal. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sometimes that happens.
Yes.
Good.
Absolutely. But you know what? The people that jump in overnight have the
Yeah.
greatest success.
That's what I think.
Um,
I usually tell people when
yeah.
people say to me, how about if I just start with Meatless Monday or something like that? I say, why don't you just just go for it right away? Just get rid of all the
Hmm.
meat in your house and start eating human food.
Hmm.
And some people just refuse to do that. So then I say, all right, then start with Meatless Monday if you must.
Hmm. Yeah. So I think the reason people that jump in have more success is because their taste buds are going to change a lot faster,
Exactly.
right? And those
Yeah.
you keep drip feeding those
Yeah.
addictions, they're not going to go away while
Right.
you're drip feeding them.
And also, they're going to see results. You know,
Absolutely.
you don't really see big results if you change 5% of your diet.
Hmm. That's true. But like I said, I never want to discourage those that want to wade in
Right.
slowly,
Right.
but yeah.
But you're
All right.
nicer than I am. So there's that.
Really? Oh, do you have people that you help that are doing things slowly or
Yeah. Well, I don't work formally as a coach as you do, but I just talk to people. And,
mhm.
I usually, when my friends have consulted me about diet, I usually just say, just throw out all those animal foods in your refrigerator and just
Mhm.
start clean tomorrow. And
Yeah,
I acknowledge a lot of people just don't seem open to that.
right.
But
And I always try to bring my clients back to the initial why they even want to do this in the first place. Typically,
mhm,
they've got some health issues going on. So it's not something to toy with, right? If you want to get rid of your high blood pressure and your type 2 diabetes, you've got to go in all the way. Why mess with that? This is important stuff to get rid of those diseases.
yeah,
All right. So, big disconnect number 5 is if it's sold at a health food store, it must be healthy.
I never heard of that one before, but that's a good one.
I've heard it many times whenever I'm doing classes or even, I just think people assume that a health food store just sells healthy items. And I've been shocked by the number of people who think that. But it's an unfortunate misconception that stems from a combination of savvy product marketing and uninformed consumers. Basically, you combine those two together, and people are buying date sweetened Oreos, thinking that's a health
Mhm.
food or something like that. So there are definitely some healthy products at the big chain and the small chain stores. I'm not saying there's not healthy foods there, but many items there are nothing more than junk food with a fancier label and a higher price. And so product labels can be very deceptive. And within the last 6 months, I created a whole class on label reading. And the words like light or natural or organic or gluten free, no cholesterol, these are all assertions that are terms that manufacturers used to lure you into purchasing their products. But the best way to know if a product is healthy is to read the ingredient list. Products to beware of would be like the fake meats and the fake cheeses and coconut butters and protein energy bars, even and shake mixes. You really have to read those ingredient lists, and even certain cereals and crackers and corn chips. In oil infused dried fruit, we want to have dried fruit, but really watch out for those oils. Even canned soups or organic margarine spreads, even certain peanut butters have added oil. So you just really have to look at product ingredient lists. I mean, and read the ingredient list first, and then you will find other tips in my class, which I'm going to cover a product here and go through something with you in just a second. So yeah, products are often filled with oils, added fats, isolated soy proteins, which are known to cause inflammation. Dairy proteins like whey or casein could be in there. Excessive sugars and sodiums, chemicals, additives, preservatives, even food dyes which are synthetic chemicals. Have you ever thought about what a food dye is? It's not like a natural dye unless you find something that's dyed red with cherry juice or something. It's a synthetic, chemically made item. So I'm going to pull one of the items from my label reading class so we could have a little fun here. This is mint chip dairy-free ice cream, which mint chip is my favorite flavor. So this really caught my eye. Circled there at the top in red, you see no sugar added, right? So the label's kind of over. I took all these pictures in the store, one months taking pictures in the store. Okay, so no sugar added. So what did they add instead, right? Let's look at the ingredient list here. There's organic coconut milk, which is water and coconut, oatmeal, and then organic coconut water, organic coconut oil, organic erythritol, which is a sugar alcohol that's found naturally in some fruits. But this processed form is highly debated. And the Cleveland Clinic and Dr. Greger say do not have erythritol for several reasons, including blood clotting issues and other things that sugar alcohols are related to. Then we have chicory root extract, organic sunflower oil, erythritol again.
Wait a minute.
Co-
They have organic erythritol and erythritol in
yes,
the
they
same
use,
product?
yeah. Yep, they
Wow.
do. Yep, they must have ran out of money and they couldn't
Well,
afford
they
the
ran out of the
organic.
organic one.
I guess so.
Wow, I've never seen that before.
And then pea protein, chocolate liqueur, natural flavor, which could be animal or plant-based. Reb, which is a stevia leaf extract, guar gum, which is a thickener which is made from guar beans, and then monk fruit, and the list goes on. So what are they using instead of sugar? That was the original question. Okay, they're using that sugar alcohol, organic erythritol, and stevia. So those are the sweeteners that they're using in this product instead of sugar. But again, we know that sugar alcohols are not healthy for us. But do you see any other glaring red flags in this ingredient list that would
Or
make you not want to buy it? What do you think, Glenn?
organic coconut oil, which is
You
the
know it.
worst
You know it. Look at
ingredient
that.
of all time.
Yes, the coconut products. So coconut, is high in saturated fat. So let's do an evaluation of this product with the numbers. So first of all, a serving size is
Oh my
2/3 of a cup.
God, 13 grams of saturated fat. Does this
Yes.
product come with an angioplasty?
It should have the 911 number on there for sure.
Wow.
So yeah, that, and I'm not going to go through this is all explained in my label class, and I'm just going to run through it quickly here. So that there's 18 grams of fat in the yellow highlight at the top. 18 grams of fat times 9 is 163 calories from fat, divided by the calories, which is 200, is 0.81. So just move the decimal point over to the right 2 places, and you've got 81% fat. So this non-dairy ice cream is 81% fat. And then when we compute the saturated fat highlighted there in blue, when we compute that using that same formula, we see that 59% of that 81% is coming from saturated fat. So this is not a healthy product for sure. Now, the sodium level at 10 milligrams is pretty good. If you're not following an SOS-free diet, then you wouldn't buy anything with any sodium. But for those that are consuming low sodium, this product would be okay for that. And then you'll see a listing there for sugars. And you'll see highlighted there in yellow at the bottom, added sugars are 0, but sugar alcohol is 8 grams. So 8 divided by 4, because there's 4 grams in a teaspoon, that means there's 2 teaspoons of a very questionable sweetener in this product. So it's high fat, it's high saturated fat, and it's got a fake sweetener, which is known to cause problems. So this ice cream stays on the shelf, right? If you're shopping in the store. Or maybe it goes in your cart. It's your decision. But for me, that stays on the shelf. And we can make our own mint ice cream at home. In fact, I have an easy recipe on my website that is delicious.
I have a theory about coconut oil, Sid. My
What is it?
theory is that coconut oil was invented by the meat industry to kill off the vegans.
Okay.
Because it is when you go into the processed food vegan section, especially refrigerated section of grocery
Mhm.
stores, you see the vegan cheeses and the vegan ice creams and the vegan uh, meats. Very, very often now they contain coconut oil. This
Mhm.
coconut oil has just taken over the processed food, at least the vegan processed food industry. And it's a terrible shame because those of us who are attracted to the diet, at least in part because of health, I'm also in it for the animals, I'm also in it for the planet. But health is important. At very least, even if you're in it for the animals, you want to stay healthy to fight for the animals or for the planet. So
Mhm.
health is important. And if you're avoiding meat because you don't want saturated fat, there is more saturated fat in this vegan ice cream than in a roast beef sandwich. 13 grams of
Mhm.
saturated fat. I mean, this is, in my
Yeah.
opinion, very scary stuff.
You know what else is scary? The number of recipes online that contain coconut oil, like vegan recipes too. It's not just the store products, but it's these people that are using coconut oil in their recipes. I'm like, no, can't we just make it without the oil?
I used to debate nutrition with a friend of mine named Gordon. He was about my age and he was about 50 pounds overweight. And he felt that I was not taking good care of my health because I wasn't getting enough fat, he felt. And he thought
Mhm.
I should do what he did and have start every day with, I forget if it was 1 or 2 tablespoons of coconut oil. And I said, don't do that, Gordon. That's not good for you. And he and I do not debate nutrition anymore because he died of a sudden cardiac
Oops,
arrest.
I think you're froze up, Glenn.
Oh, I froze up? Well, continue, Sid. You don't seem to have frozen up.
Oops, you're freezing up a little.
Sid, can you hear me?
There you are. Now you're back.
Okay. So I was saying, go ahead, Sid, and you continue because you don't seem to have frozen up.
All right, let's push on with big disconnect number 6 is failing to own my role in my own health matters, right? We have to recognize our own role in things. And in my book, I talk about the 5 whys technique, which was a problem solving technique used by automotive manufacturers to determine the underlying causes of their parts issues, like when parts were faulty. And I believe Toyota was the first company to use this. And when my husband, who actually works with various automotive part manufacturer companies, when he explained this to me, this light bulb went on in my head. Like, this solution could work for diet too, because how it works is the nature of a problem as well as the solution can become clear when we ask the question why 5 times. Now, the number 5 is just a guideline. It could take only 3 questions to get to the root cause, or it might take 6 or more. But here's a very simplistic example. Okay, the problem is the car won't start. Well, why? Why? Because the battery's dead. Why is the battery dead? Because the alternator is not functioning. Why is that? Because the belt is broken. Why is that? Because it's extended past its useful service life and was not replaced. Well, why was that? Because the service schedule wasn't maintained. Okay, so the solution was to um, make sure that the car is serviced on time, right? The vehicle was not maintained according to the service schedule. So the root cause then was that. The root cause wasn't the battery. The root cause was that the car wasn't serviced when it should have been. So I love the simplicity of that 5 whys. And I thought, how can we apply that to getting people to think about the cause and effect of food, like with the 5 whys? So I came up with this little example. So say you're diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, or someone is. Um, and let me just backtrack a minute. Another reason I thought this was so helpful, because not only can it help identify the root cause of a medical problem, but it can save the hassle, the time, and the money that might be spent pursuing some other perceived but ineffective solution. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So ask your family and your friends to join you in this exercise, because groupthink can often lead to other ideas, from other people too. So here's an example with type 2 diabetes. So why do you have type 2 diabetes? Because there's too much glucose in the blood. Well, why is that? Because the glucose is remaining in the bloodstream because cannot enter the intended muscle cells that it needs to enter. Well, why is that? Because the cells have become resistant to insulin. Insulin is the hormone that escorts the glucose into the cell. Okay, so our cells are insulin resistant. Well, why is that? Because excess fat has accumulated inside the cells. So the cells are gummed up. They can't be unlocked because they're gummed up and compromised with fat. And that interferes with insulin's ability to get the glucose into your cell. Well, why are my cells compromised with fat? Well, either fat from the bloodstream has built up and it's blocking the pathway. And it should be noted here that even slender people can become type 2 diabetic. This isn't just about fat or, overweight people, even though our own fat cells do produce additional fat. So why is that fat in there? It's most likely the consumption of a high fat standard American diet, or again, the fat cells produced from one's own fat stores. So when diet is determined to be the root cause of the problem, then the solution becomes clear, right? We have to switch the foods that we're eating, and then you're faced with that choice. You're faced with that decision about whether you'll change your food intake or if you're just going to continue to choose the foods that are making you sick, basically. So if you're going to choose the latter, then it's time to ask one additional and very important why. And answering this final why will be an integral part of your success. So figuring out why you're choosing to repeat the same destructive patterns, even when you know that the risk of eating unhealthy food, when you know what those risks are and you're still choosing to do that, that's a question that only you can explore and answer truthfully for yourself. Because a lot of people believe that getting heavier and sicker is a normal part of aging, which it is not. Or maybe you expect your doctor to fix your lifestyle related problems, which they cannot fix them. They can treat them. Or it might be that you can identify with one of the 12 barriers to change that I talk about in the book. But finding the answer to that reluctance on your part to change is going to require some serious soul searching and honest self examination. But your success in losing weight and regaining your health might ultimately depend on your understanding and addressing that final why, like why you're choosing to do what you do. All right. The one drawback to the five whys is that it's limited to your knowledge base, right? So that's why we say learn all you can. Keep learning about the benefits of plant-based nutrition and how your body works. Because if you don't have that knowledge, you won't have, the five whys will not be as successful as they could be. So the bottom line is that we all have personal responsibility when it comes to our health. And until we analyze and deal with those deeper issues behind our behaviors, we're just going to continue to be frustrated and flit from one diet to another and feel defeated when they don't work. So I urge you to take the time to examine your thoughts regarding this, as complacency is one of the biggest obstacles to health improvement, right? We just become complacent about things. And even I know a lot of people have limiting beliefs. We all have limiting beliefs to some degree. And that is the internal things that we're telling ourselves, like, well, I'm too old for that. That's a limiting belief. I'll never be able to do that. That's a limiting belief. So on my website, there's actually a homework assignment, a free assignment, limiting beliefs homework assignment, where you can explore that a little more if you're interested. So remember that the foods you choose to eat today are going to determine whether you live in health or sickness tomorrow. So no matter what you are currently eating or how far you've possibly veered off the path, if you have, you always have the option to choose that much better path. And the cool thing is your body is always striving to heal. Your body wants to heal. It's trying to protect you. And it can do so when we feed it the right foods, the right environment. And that is the proven and well-documented way back to normal weight and good health, a whole food, plant-based, no added oil diet. Again, this is the most anti-inflammatory diet available. I have an inflammation class that I taught at our local college for many years. That's on my website if you're interested in that. But this is the only way proven to reverse even our number one killer, heart disease. Even advanced stages of heart disease have been reversed through this type of eating. And here's my website, cydnotter.com. There's a free webinar there, 3 food mistakes which lead to painful joints, extra weight, and health problems the doctors aren't solving. Free smoothies, free 21-day plan. My book is there. And then if you do sign up for the inflammation course, if you use the coupon code TAKEOFF50, you'll get that for half price. All right, I'm going to stop
Oh,
share.
all right. That was a beautiful presentation, Cyd. And that
Thank you,
emphasis
Glenn.
towards the end on personal responsibility for your health. That's what I believe in. Now, there are times when a person gets dealt an unlucky card and gets some diagnosis that has nothing to do with how they ate or their lifestyle. It does happen, and there are times when you absolutely need a doctor. I have,
Mhm,
on a few occasions in my life, needed surgery and had great
mhm.
surgeons. And I believe in turning to Western medicine, at least for surgery when needed. But um, for most conditions, for most of what the American public is suffering from, obesity, 40+% obesity, another 30% overweight, inflammatory conditions, type 2 diabetes, heart disease,
Yeah,
hypertension. They're eating their way into almost all the time. They're eating their way into these diseases. And
right.
if you go to the doctor, then I hope you go to one of the few doctors who understand nutrition, because most doctors are not taught nutrition in medical school. And really, you can learn this information through books, through people like you who are health coaches, through YouTube videos and what you can find online. The reality is that the diet most Americans eat is unnatural and it's causing all
Mhm.
these diseases.
Right. So getting heavier and sicker is the body's response to eating abnormal food, right? It's the
Yeah,
body's normal
yeah,
response to abnormal food. And I like what you said, Glenn. This is not a panacea. We can still develop things even when we're eating this way, but our risks go way, way down. Plus, diet is only one of the lifestyle factors, right? We need
right,
exercise, we need good water, we need sunshine, we need community. There's other factors as well that
right,
will play a role in our health.
right. But I think
Yeah.
nothing is more significant than diet. And for example, stress can really affect people's health. But there were studies that during World War II, heart disease went down in some European countries like uh, like Greece and I think England as well, while they were getting bombed. Now they're getting bombed, they're under stress. You'd think heart disease would go up, but they didn't have access to the meat.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
even with more stress in their lives, not eating meat, the heart disease went down. Um, so
Mhm.
I really believe that when you when you ask yourself, what exactly am I expecting the doctor to do for me? If I'm if I have high blood pressure and I'm 50 pounds overweight and I'm developing type 2 diabetes, am I expecting the doctor to give me different pills and medications that are going to make me healthy? Really? Because
Mhm.
they won't. The only thing that will make you healthy will be changing your lifestyle, changing your diet.
Mhm.
And that's not really a criticism of doctors because um, there is no way that a pill, will ever become a healthy way to reverse conditions that you eat your way into. The only criticism of doctors is they should study nutrition and be able to help patients reverse their diseases instead of just managing the symptoms.
Mhm. Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah. Um, and speaking of healthy food, we were chatting before we began, and the First Seed Foods, which is healthy Indian food. I love Indian food. It's my favorite food, but I don't go to Indian restaurants because of all the oil in the food. But you said, Sid, that you had tried this food from First Seed Foods and
I
enjoyed it.
have. Y- Yeah, somebody as a gift. This was a really nice gift. I received a box of 12 different cartons of First Seed food.
Wow.
And we ate on that for, it lasted a long time for my husband and I, and it was delicious.
Yeah.
It was very, very good. Highly recommend it. And I typically would not think I would like Indian food that much, but I really enjoyed it and plan to order again.
It's in my opinion, the most delicious food in the world. I don't like it very spicy, but
Hmm.
with some spiciness, some mild spiciness, and with good rice. So often we'll prepare uh, something like purple rice at home and then have the Indian food with it. And just makes a great meal. And as you say, it lasts a long time. You get a bunch of these
Hmm.
containers in the mail, and you buy it with a bundle and choose many different dishes, and then it lasts a long time in the freezer. So
Hmm.
again, for our viewers, you put in Glen 10 for $10 off your first order at firstseedfoods.com. Um, what could you tell us about your book, The Plan A Diet?
Yeah, we just celebrated the 5th anniversary of the
Oh,
release
I
of
didn't
this
get you a
book.
gift.
It's never too late.
Okay.
This is my book, The Plan A Diet, and it talks a lot about what we were talking about here. There's a chapter called Hooked on Sweets, Treats, and Other Cheats. That's a little chapter on food addiction. Um, this also includes scripture. If you're looking for that type of support as well, there's some scriptural encouragement included. Be a
Yeah, you've
nonconformist.
studied the biblical principles related to diet, have you not? That's
I
something
have
you
in depth. Yes, I have.
and
Yep,
so what can
in
you
depth.
tell us? Can you give us a little summation? Does the Bible encourage the kind of diet we eat?
It does, Glenn. Yes, it's God's plan A was trees, fruits, vegetables,
Uh-huh.
plants. Plants were given to us for food when everything was ideal and, man was never going to get sick.
Does it say anywhere
Absolutely.
in the Bible that we shouldn't be eating animals?
No, but it has principles that say we should take care of ourselves. Uh,
Mhm.
so it says we should not, anything we cannot say no to, we soon becomes our master. So the Bible does not say anywhere that we should not eat meat, but God never said we had to eat meat. It was
Mhm.
an option because people started eating meat and then they wanted it and craved it. But that didn't happen for the first 1700 years of the Bible till after the flood. That's when they started. So yeah, it goes into that. It includes a lot of things. But this is one of my favorite verses. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Isn't that what we do with diet?
Yeah.
So I try to include encouragement along that line too for people that are of that ilk and interested in that type of thing. There's a chapter called the dreaded G word, but it's gluttony, right? Overeating is called gluttony in scripture. And nobody likes to talk about that word, even in the church. Nobody ever talks about that because the church is no better than the general public when it comes to health and weight issues. In fact, some of them are even worse, and believe me, they are on my heart to try to reach them.
Hmm.
There's a chapter, The 12 Barriers to Change, that I've talked about. And then one called Plant Your Best Crops, because a man is going to reap whatever he sows. And how true is that with diet, right? If we reap an unhealthy diet, I mean, if we plant an unhealthy diet, we're going to reap disease. So that principle really ties in with our diet as well. And then exploring the bottom line, that's where I talk about the 5 whys technique and why that's so important. And then be a nonconformist. Don't um, don't conform to your culture. And then there's a chapter though there called Addressing Objections, for all the objections I hear about why this is not, true. I figured that was going to come my way. So I have a whole chapter, which is free on my website if you want to read that chapter, called Addressing Objections. Um, it talks about when the Israelites were wandering in the desert and they missed the meat. They were coming out of Egypt, heading to the promised land, and
Right.
they were crying for their meat. And God sent them meat along with a plague because they were dissatisfied with the manna, the bread that he had sent them. So just things like that people might find of interest.
Well, you just said something that went by quickly, but I think it's very important. You said be a
Mhm.
nonconformist. And sometimes I
Yeah,
think that
don't conform to,
sometimes I think
I'm
that's what it
sorry,
all
go ahead.
comes down to is so many people are afraid to be nonconformist I think to many people when they think about going on a vegan diet and they may have their families that don't eat a vegan diet, they certainly have their friends who don't eat a vegan diet. And they consider it.
Mhm.
They might be listening to this podcast now and saying, "Gee, these people make sense. Maybe I should do it." But why don't they do it? They're scared of being nonconformists. They're scared of going from the popular club to the unpopular club. There are
Yeah,
so much fewer of us than of the meat eaters. And I think a
there
lot of
is.
people
But what is your priority?
don't want to be nonconformists. I mentioned very early in our talk that I was never able to swallow a
Yeah.
pill. There are two genes that I have that are just terrific genes that I'm very proud of. One, I didn't get the gene for being able to swallow a pill, so I got very lucky there. And two, I never got the gene for caring what other people think. I just never cared. So it enabled me to make a decision at 17 to not eat meat, and I didn't care what anybody thought. And it's never bothered me when if anybody thought badly of it. I don't know. I really don't think too many people care what I eat, but I certainly don't care if they do care. Were you always a
I'm
non?
with you, Glenn. No, well, I never thought about it. I was raised in an Italian home and with all the cheeses and meats and
Right,
polenta and, oh
right.
yeah. And then when
Eh,
my cholesterol got high in my mid 30s, I decided to go vegetarian. Like you, I went vegetarian at first.
Right,
Unhealthy vegetarian to unhealthy vegan to finally whole food plant-based, no oil.
right. And
Yeah.
did you ever
But
think, gee, this is not going to be popular. I wonder what people are going to think, or did you just jump in?
I guess I got that I don't care gene too that you got,
Uh-huh.
Gene, because I,
Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't bother me that there's a mantra in the financial world, broke is normal, be weird.
Uh-huh.
Overweight and sick is normal, be weird. Be the weirdo. So I want to be the weirdo when it comes
Uh-huh.
to this to what's normal in our country. I don't want to be what's normal in our country, which
Right.
is for the most part is overweight and on 4 drugs by the time you're 50. That's the average.
Four
50,
drugs
yeah.
by 50? Wow.
The average, yep. So I don't want to go that route. I want to stay out of the medical system as much as possible. That's really my
Yeah.
motivator.
Yeah.
I have white coat disease. I do not want to see the white coat. I don't want to go in for testing. I don't want to go in for surgery. So I
I
will do
just
what it
visit the
takes.
doctor occasionally when I get a hernia. I got I got two hernias, and my first thought was I need surgery because you
Yeah,
can't fix a hernia with blueberries. If you could, I would go for the blueberries, but you can't.
right.
And then it turned out, and this is a whole other show. And in fact, I did an interview with Dr. Jonathan Eunice, my hernia surgeon. It turns out most surgeons do hernia repairs wrong. And I had to find one of the three or four surgeons in America who does it correctly without giving me an unnecessary piece of plastic mesh in my body. So that was an
Wow.
experience. But the interesting thing was, and I have to all credit to Dr. Jonathan Eunice, who did my surgery at the Center for Hernia Repair in Sarasota. I'll give him all the credit, but I was cut open, repaired, and sewed shut twice, and I had no pain. Almost no pain.
Mm,
I didn't have to take an aspirin. Now, again, all credit to Dr. Eunice, but maybe it helped that there isn't much inflammation in my body because I'm eating a natural
mhm,
diet of human food. And as good a
exactly.
surgeon as Dr. Eunice is, I think if I had been eating animal foods, I would have been in a lot of pain after that surgery both times.
Right. Yep. Your diet really contributed to your healing process, I would imagine, for sure.
Yeah. So it was,
Mhm.
it was outpatient surgery and very minor for me because there was no pain. And then just I got to enjoy Sarasota, which is a beautiful town, though not as good as it was when I went to college there.
Okay, that's where the surgeon was in
Yeah.
Sarasota?
Yeah. So it
Oh,
was like going on vacation. I called it a herniacation because
are
Sarasota is
you
a
under
lovely
any
place to
lifting
visit.
yeah,
But
can you lift weight now or are you still under restriction or
I can lift weights now, but not as much as my friend Jeff Palmer, the vegan bodybuilder. He apparently bench presses 450 pounds. Um, I, I
yeah.
can lift the bench, but that's about it. So, uh, but yes, Dr. Yunus said to me, after a month of being careful, you could go back to, you could, he said you could
Oh,
join the seniors bodybuilding championship. I said, thanks a lot for saying senior. But,
hmm
but yeah, I can,
yeah.
I'm just fine.
Yeah, I had a knee scope last year, which I never wanted to do, but I thought I had torn a meniscus, and
Hmm.
it was really hurting, and I had to have that surgery, just like you,
Hmm.
if I thought blueberries would have fixed my knee, I would just have eaten a lot of blueberries. But
Yeah.
so there are times when we are going to need some surgical intervention, perhaps. But
Absolutely. And I consulted with a
yeah,
plant-based doctor who said about the hernia, why don't you just watch and wait? Because he was very skeptical of his
hmm
fellow doctors. And
hmm
I found that I was just watching and I was waiting and watching my hernia get bigger. So why, why not
yeah,
just get it over with? And the surgeons in this country are terrific for the most part. They know what they're doing. And
hmm
they're able to do it with skill. It's just that they are not trained to do hernias correctly. So in my opinion, I've always got to say, I'm not a doctor. It's just my amateur opinion, folks. You don't have to listen to me. But the reality is, there's no reason in my opinion, for the mesh if you are slender.
How
And
did you figure that out? Did you just do your own research and
Yeah, as soon as I
you
got the
found
hernia,
out?
because I had heard of hernias all my life, but I didn't know even what it looked like. And then I got one and I knew what it looked like. So I Googled
Mhm.
hernias and I discovered that there are lawsuits from people who are suffering in terrible pain from hernia mesh.
Oops, you're frozen. Oh, there.
Oh, I'm frozen again. Am I back?
Yeah, you're back. Yep.
So I discovered there are people who suffer terrible pain from hernia mesh. And I thought, why do I need this mesh? And it turns out I don't. But if you were to train surgeons in one surgery, one size fits all, it would have to be the mesh because um, the correct kind of repair that I got, which is called a Schuldeis repair, you can't do that on obese people. And so
Mm,
if surgeons only learned the Schuldeis technique, they wouldn't be able to work on half the American population. So they
mhm.
learned the mesh technique and they could work on everybody except slender people would be getting unnecessary mesh. And that's what's happening today. In my
That's
opinion, I
interesting.
could be wrong, folks. I'm not a doctor. Boy, these disclaimers get annoying after a while.
But
Um,
you are a hernia patient. I
I
think that
am a
speaks
hernia
volumes.
patient, and I'm confirmed in my opinion that there's absolutely no reason for this mesh if you're slender. Um,
Mhm.
so anyway, we got off the subject there, but neither of us has been hit by a tornado. So all is well. And it's always a pleasure speaking with you. People can find you at cydnotter.com, cydnotter.com. You are available for
Mhm.
health coaching, and your book is The
Mhm.
Plant A Diet. And is there anything else I should
Plan
tell
A,
folks?
like your first choice.
What's that?
The Plan A diet.
The
Yeah.
Plan A. I said plant. The Plan A diet, right? And
That's about it. Yeah.
okay.
All I can think
So,
of is to leave some words of encouragement that, the last, my sister just passed away recently,
oh, I'm
within two
sorry.
weeks ago,
Oh no.
on 14 medications. Yeah,
Oh,
81, 14 meds, dementia, bedridden from a
oh,
stroke for years. And so, believe me, people, you do not want to go down that path. Please,
no.
what you do today is going to really affect what you're going to be like at 81, which for me, I'm going to be 70 soon. So that's only 11 years away for me. So please, please, I know it's easy. Like today, you want this cookie, or, today you want this cheese pizza, but just think about it in the bigger picture. And please do what's right. Because the you 5 years from now will thank the you of today if you make the right choices today.
Yeah, I know, we're in the same age range, and when you see your old friends starting to get heart disease, or you have stents
Mhm.
and different medical interventions, heart
Yeah,
bypass surgery, and you just want to
exactly.
shake them and say this is all unnecessary. It
Yeah.
gets upsetting. Um, but it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise, Glenn, thank you for inviting me back today.
Okay. See you soon, Cyd. Take care.
Bye bye.